Hey, hi, how are you? My name is Felt. Welcome back to Magic the Gathering. Today we're talking about a Naya Reanimator deck that I have. If you've been watching me stream, you've probably been watching me play this while I'm waiting in queues and stuff for various games. It's a deck that I've been having a lot of fun with lately. It's a deck that, well, not the most powerful, not the best, not the most, well, anything sometimes. It's just incredibly fun to be able to vomit out massive creatures that provide tons of value on like turn 4 or 5. Let's get started by talking about what the payoffs are, and then we'll talk about how you get those payoffs going. The payoffs, in the simplest terms, are Titan of Industry, which is, if you don't know about Titan of Industry, this is a card from Streets of New Capenna that is incredibly powerful. When it enters the battlefield, it either destroys an artifact or enchantment, makes someone gain 5 life, creates a 4/4 Rhino, or puts a shield counter on a creature you control, and you can do 2 of those things. Meaning that you can either basically start regaining life, you can start making a board presence, you can take out a pesky enchantment that's been bugging you, or you can give a shield counter for protection. And in a meta where exile is a little less common nowadays, protection can be very powerful. The other big payoff is Sanctuary Warden. Incredibly good card. It enters the battlefield with 2 shield counters on it, and whenever it enters or attacks, it does just say enters the battlefield, by the way. This does not have to be played from hand, which is why it works so well in Reanimator. Just going to clarify. When it enters the battlefield or attacks, you remove any type of counter from anything. Essentially. You can remove +1 counters, you can remove shield counters, you can remove Planeswalker loyalty counters, and then you draw a card and create a 1/1 Green and White Citizen creature token. Hey, you want to know when that's useful? When Liliana of the Veil is in the meta and trying to make you sacrifice creatures each turn. You want to know what's great? Having citizens and rhino warriors that are moderately threatening that your opponent cannot deal with. One last reanimation target that mostly works pretty well, and I will say mostly, there's a reason that it's a one-off in the deck, is Sarah Paragon. I believe it's working now. It used to have some buggy problems, but I believe it should be working now. But the bottom line is it can reanimate any permanent spell with mana 3 or less. It can pull any of those from your graveyard. And instead of going to the graveyard again, it just gets exiled. But as you can see, we have a handful of really powerful 2 and 3 drops that can make great use of Sarah Paragon. However, it's not really a win con, it's more of a mid to late game, I need something now card. It is also only a 4-drop, meaning that if you have tons of mana open to play with, it can be really useful for doing multiple plays in a turn. There's also a 3/4 flyer, which is just useful. Speaking of flyers, our other reanimation targets that are mostly here for flavor and not actually because they are good. Titan of Industry and Sanctuary Warden provide so much more value than these cards, but I just enjoy them nonetheless, and I had room in my deck because I don't own all the copies of the cards I want right now because I'm wild card poor. But anyways, Kyodai, Soul of Kamigawa. I feel like he honestly fits in the deck even without trying to add dragon flavoring like I am, but he is a flash creature that gives a target permanent indestructible. Not great against exile effects, but if you run out of shield tokens, and your creatures are going in on the attack and your opponent's trying to, say, Infernal Grasp them, flash in Kyodai for 4 mana, you now have a 3/3 flyer, and you have indestructible on the creature that might be trying to attack. Atsushi, the Blazing Sky, a surprisingly high-value creature. 2 and 2 red for 4/4. When it dies, you get to either exile the top 2 cards of your library, so card advantage, or just make 3 treasure tokens, so mana advantage. He's pretty good. Highly recommend using him in almost any red deck, honestly. I think he is heavily undervalued right now. The fact that he is a legendary does kind of downplay his power level, but I still feel like he's very good. Ow, the Dawn Sky. Being able to add +1/+1 counters when he dies is pretty good, but being able to pull any non-land 4-drops, 4-drop or less, and just slam them onto the battlefield. Ooh, that's nice. That is so nice. You want to see all of my 4-drops and less? We have all this stuff over here, which we'll be getting into in a minute. It's pretty powerful. It doesn't always pan out. Sometimes you look at the top 7 cards in your library, and it's 5 lands, a Titan of Industry, and an Invoke Justice, and you're like, well, shit, I could have used to draw those, but hey, it happens. And he was actually my inspiration for this deck. Believe it or not, it wasn't actually the reanimation targets that made me want to build this Naya Reanimator deck. It was actually Rith Liberated Primeval. Other dragons have Ward 2. It has Ward 2. It's a flying 5/5 for 2 and red, green, white. And if a creature or planeswalker an opponent controlled was dealt excess damage, create a 4/4 dragon creature token with flying. It's moderately powerful. You don't really want to run more than one of it or two of it in a deck, though, because it's a little expensive and a little color heavy. But I think it works pretty well in this deck for making just your board state harder to deal with. If you have out Kyodai, for example, making like a Titan indestructible, and then you have a Rith out, giving you Kyodai Ward 2, well, you just made it even harder for your opponent to deal with it. The dragons are mostly for flavor, though. They're not necessarily the best choices in this deck. I would probably include more of the cards over here on my left in place of the dragons if I had the wild cards, but they are quite fun, and they do add a little bit of spice to a deck that is otherwise very blasé to me. Now let's talk about the draw, discard, and otherwise good effects of the deck. Spirited Companion. This lovely little doggo allows you to draw when you play him. He can be brought back through a variety of means, through a variety of cards we have in this deck, but he's just a fun little 1/1 chump blocker who lets you draw. It's essentially 2 mana to cycle him out of your deck, which essentially means you're only playing a 56 card deck, quote unquote. Not exactly, but you understand the idea. Cathartic Pyre for a little bit of spot removal for decks that play some smaller creatures that you want to get rid of early, or for draw 2, or discard 2, draw 2. A lovely looting effect. Speaking of lovely looting effects, we have me coughing into the microphone. Wow, that was very professional, Felt. We're keeping that in. That's not going anywhere. But we have a classic. We have Fable of the Mirror Breaker. This card has this thing has so much value in any deck right now that can run red, let alone this deck. Did you know that when you create copies of tokens with the reflections of Kikijiki, they have their ETB effects? So Titan will get 2 more triggers, as well as there being another 7/7 with haste. Sanctuary Warden will show up with 2 shield counters, which you can then remove 1 upon ETB and remove the other upon attacking for 2 cards. Reflections of Kikijiki is amazing in its own right, and it's one of those things that will draw your opponent's aggro and ire. And they'll typically be out of cards and out of answers by the time you're plopping down your Titan of Industry when it has been brought back from the dead. Restoration of Aganjo. It is mana ramp, which is pretty good. The Architect of Restoration is surprisingly powerful. Making a bunch of 1/1s can be really good inside of, say, a mono-black matchup. Your opponent runs Liliana of the Veil, 1/1 tokens to sacrifice. Just saying. You can also dump cards to pull something out of your graveyard with mana value 2 or less. If you get this early on, you can use it to mana ramp by dumping, say, a tapped land and then pulling it onto the battlefield. If you're in late game, you can use it to dump, say, a Titan and then pull back a Spirited Companion that has been killed for card advantage. And it's just good. It's just good. I think it's a little underplayed for how good it is. However, it does also kind of need to be played in a deck that has white as a predominant color, because otherwise you're not actually getting all the planes out of it. Because, to clarify here, it does say search for basic planes, which is why we run 8 planes in this deck. Otherwise we wouldn't run so many. It does work out with Invoke Justice, which we'll get to later, but still. Elder Dragon War is something that I found very recently, and very recently decided, you know what, this is pretty good. It deals 2 damage to each creature and each opponent, meaning it can be a semi-board wipe. It's a little late, it's a little expensive, and a little late of a card to be as a semi-board wipe. However, Mono Black is playing a bunch of pretty cheap stuff right now, and a bunch of pretty low-to-the-ground stuff, and if you can get it out on curve, it can be a pretty effective board wipe. At least take care of a good chunk of the smaller 2-drops. It can be really good against, say, Rakdos Sacrifice, because the entirety of their board state is typically 2 toughness or less, and the idea is that they're sacrificing it and not really making it bigger. But the most important step, in my opinion, or the most important lore piece? Lore counter? It's the two. You can discard whatever you want and then draw that many cards. You can dump your whole hand and then draw anything you want, which is really useful in a Reanimator deck. And you can play it as a 4-drop that does that for you. 4 mana to discard draw is not the greatest effect in the world, however, it will then give you a free dragon next turn, which can be annoying for some decks. Or you can just play it as a 4-drop that gives you a 4/4 flying dragon, which, honest to God, there's worse things in the meta right now than a 4/4 flying dragon. It has a lot of value on its first 2, but the fact that you can just get a dragon token out there for 4 mana can be really useful. It can also synergize very well with Kikijiki, because Kikijiki can just start duping those flying dragon tokens and just swarm of flyers that you don't care about their well-being, which can also be there to be annoying while you have, say, Titans and Sanctuary Wardens out. Wandering Emperor is just that good. She fits into any deck that has white as a predominant color, and she is just that powerful. Making tokens, adding +1/+1 counters, exiling tapped creatures to gain life. She is just incredibly powerful right now, and she fits into basically any deck that runs white. However, in this deck, she is a great stopgap, a great 4-drop. We have a lot of 3 and 4 drops in this deck, and not a lot of 2s and 1s. However, it does mostly work out because the 3 and 4 drops are powerful enough to grab your opponent's attention and make them want to deal with them. People don't like Kikijiki resolving. People don't like Aganjo giving you card advantage. People don't like the Wandering Emperor being able to run wild. And those things draw your opponent's attention, so you can play Invoke Justice. Return target permanent card from your graveyard to the battlefield, then distribute 4 +1/+1 counters among any number of vehicles, creatures and/or vehicles. I'm sorry, I cannot read today. We're leaving it in. These are live. Bottom line is it's a Reanimator spell, and it gives you 4 +1/+1 counters. Hey, you want to know what appreciates 4 +1 counters? A massive trampling creature that can have shield counters. Want to know what else appreciates them? A flyer with shield counters that can remove them for card advantage. You should absolutely be running 4 copies of this in the deck. The fact that I only run 3 is kind of criminal. And honestly, if you were going to drop anything, I would probably tone down the dragons to include more Invoke Justices. The dragons are fun and flavorful, but they're not super necessary. They are a part of the deck that makes the deck fun to me. And it's part of what makes it a little bit janky and probably not quite so optimal and a little bit harder to win with, but I enjoy it. If you don't like them, just take them out. It's fine. I won't hate you for it. Let's talk about the mana base. Mana bases are in kind of a tough spot right now. I don't have any of the new lands that fit this color scheme. Any of the pain lands that ping you to create mana. However, I feel like those might be bad in this deck. This deck's a little slow. You might want to run gain lands on purpose. I am currently running Windscarred Crag and Blossoming Sands as gain lands. And I'm only running these 2 because you want as much white mana as possible to play Invoke Justice. That's why we have a ton of plains. You have a handful of mountains because we want to play Fable and Cathartic Pyre and Elder Dragon War on curve, so we have a couple of mountains. It's a predominantly red-white deck, and our only green sources are from Blossoming Sands for life gain, Overgrown Farmland because, well, it's a great land and I only have 1 copy, and Jetmir's Garden. Honestly, you might want to run a full playset of Jetmir's Garden. It's really good. You might be wondering, why do you even have the green? You want to be able to play Titan on curve if possible. It won't always work out because we only have 5 green sources in the deck, but you want to be able to get those 3 green that Titan requires. It is nice to be able to actually just play him and not have to reanimate him. I've seen a few decks floating around across previous metas, across previous splits that, well, you would run Reanimator for Titan, but you wouldn't actually run enough green to hard play him. So if you drew him, he was a dead draw until you could get rid of him. Including a little bit of green mana in the deck makes it so that you can, in fact, just hard play him. Personally, I would say maybe take away a couple of these Windscarred Crags and fit in some more Jetmir's Gardens, maybe take away the farmland to fit in more Jetmir's Gardens. But the bottom line is you should probably run 4 copies of this because it has all the mana you could possibly need, and if you're flooding out late game, you can cycle it, and that's very useful. The gain lands are surprisingly useful. I promise they do have use. Restoration of Aganjo brings something back to the graveyard tapped, so if you're discarding a land to get it back for mana ramp, these work wonderfully for it. If you just need something to discard because you're like, well, this doesn't really help me mana ramp, you can discard to Cathartic or Fable of the Mirror Breaker. So they do have their uses. They do. They are quite useful. you might be able to filter them out, though. This has been a very long video, but this deck is a little in-depth, a little weird. There will be a deck list down in the description. If you liked the video, please don't forget to like it. Comment if you want to talk about the deck, and subscribe if you want to see more content like this. Or more content like my other videos, like Final Fantasy XIV and Destiny. This is just, we're a bit of a variety channel around here. Yeah, thanks for watching, and I hope to catch you in the next one.